the letter of Paul the Apostle to the Hebrews. But those names have been added. The document in its original form didn't have a title. So I've been thinking as we roll along, kind of keep in mind what might be an alternative title for this document. And we looked at the first part of it, which we call chapter 1. And based upon that, we might call it quotations from the Old Testament, or we might call it Jesus and the angels, because that was kind of the subject of that. Jesus Christ is greater than the angels, and so he's distinctive. So I was just thinking about that, and is this a letter? Is it a treatise? I was thinking also why we call it a letter, because it seems to be it's not specifically addressed to any particular group of people, but it seems to relate a lot to the Old Testament system and how that's been fulfilled under Jesus Christ. And so that's maybe why it's called Hebrews. I suppose you could call it Jews. You could call it, Israelites. There's other names that you could give it. Is it a letter or just a treatise? Hard to say, but I was thinking as I thought about as we move on through this, so many of the letters of the New Testament contain what's called, I don't know, maybe not necessarily a treatise, but a statement of document. And then there's kind of a little bit of a switch, and it'll say, therefore, this is what you should do. And this document that we call Hebrews is the same, because we'll get to it much later, probably quite a bit later, given our speed of going through it. But in chapter 12, there's that word, therefore. In light of all that's come before, therefore. That sounds like Paul, doesn't it? But anyway.
Say the final greeting, I appeal to you, brothers. Is that the first time he directly addresses?
Yeah, it's not like some of the other letters, but it does contain in chapter 13 those greetings.
It doesn't start out though like his other letters.
That's right.
Saying something like who it is and who it's addressed to.
Yeah. It's not the traditional form of a Greek letter word. They tell you right off, who I'm writing to you. And we'll give the name. Anyway, just as you go along, think of how you might caption this, whatever it is, letter or treatise or doctrinal statement or anyway. We were to the second division, which we call chapter 2, after thinking about the angels last time. And in this edition, it's called Warning to Pay Attention. In this paragraph, starting at verse 1. We must pay more careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. What's therefore referring to? That's a transition. Here's the word therefore.
They're referring back to the idea that Jesus is superior to the angels, and he wants them to keep that in mind as you go forward, because maybe there have been other people teaching different things, and so he wants them to really remember the superiority of Jesus, because then he's going to go and show how he's superior to other things too.
Yeah. So they've been very attentive to the law in some respects. The form of religious worship under the law of Moses has been preserved for centuries. And from what we can tell, it's still going on as we read this, when this was written. And they thought it was so important. Now the Lord has said over the years and over the centuries, I'm not satisfied with what you've done, but the form has been honored at least. And so he says, if the message spoken by angels was binding, and every violation and disobedience received its just punishment, how shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? If you've thought the Jewish law was important enough to maintain at least a formal allegiance to it for 1,400 years, then this message by one who's greater than the angels is especially important. And how shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? That's a nice way to put it, isn't it? A great salvation.
Going back to drift away, the idea there is a boat without an anchor. Okay, you're not anchored and you start floating away, drifting away. And in this case, it's drifting away like Galatians. There was a conscientious decision, to just turn away and embrace Judaism, okay, over Christianity, which was backwards.
Okay. So we'd like to know more about some of the work of the angels, but we talked about that. This salvation, which was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us by those who heard him. And this is the verse that's cited by those who say, this couldn't possibly be Paul, because to Paul, he made a point of writing to others, I got the message directly. I didn't get it from anybody else. So I'm equal to the other apostles who were with Jesus. But I'm not sure that's conclusive, because even if Paul received the word directly from Jesus as he met him, and he could still say in general, this was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us as people, as a congregation, as people of the Lord, and by those who heard him, including Paul himself, would be one who's heard him and who's confirming it to others. So just the way a turn of the phrase is sometimes employed to try to make a guess about the authorship. But the point is not that. The point is this salvation. The message of Jesus is a message of salvation. In the world today, as a lot of people would say, well, the message of Jesus is a message of things you can't do or things you're not supposed to do. Don't do these things. Or the message of Jesus is one of, infringing upon human freedom and human choice and human free will. But it's really a message of salvation. And to really appreciate salvation, you have to have that conception, really a depth of feeling that you need to be saved from something. And that's how, we were talking about that on Wednesday night. How do you touch the hearts of people who don't think that they need to be saved from it? Think that everything's pretty good. And sometimes it takes the work of God to shock people, and then they can react. You want to sit here, Dan? I'm sorry, I take up 2 chairs. Anyway, as we think of salvation. God also testified to it by signs, wonders, and various miracles. And we can think back to some of the letters of Paul, specifically Corinthians, where gifts of different kinds of gifts were listed. Gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. It's not that you shout for those, it's what the Lord chooses to give. So that's, pay attention. And that fits in with what we talked about in the letter to Titus. Remind people, pay attention. Keep going over this stuff, because you're gonna forget it, or you're gonna forget it in practice. So it's worth the time and effort. Anyway, that's kind of the introduction. Jesus is made like his brethren. Jesus is above angels, but now we go into a little different topic. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. Interesting, the salvation that he's talking about, he's saying refers to the world to come. But there is a place where someone has testified, what is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor and put everything under his feet. I wonder why. Well, see, these guys, where they said someone has testified, it'd be convenient if they said in such and such chapter, such and such verse, such and such. But when this is written, those ancient documents weren't divided into chapters and verses. They did one long thing. And in many of the documents, they weren't divided into words. They were a string of letters, and you had to really know what you were doing to figure out where a word began or ended. So anyway, who is the someone of chapter 2, verse 6?
We'll go to Psalm.
It's a psalm, yeah, it's Psalm 8 is what it is. There is a place, Psalm, what we call it. I guess the Psalms were differentiated. I don't know if they were numbered.
It says it's a Psalm of David.
Okay.
Psalm 8, David.
Some of those seem to go back a long way, those descriptions of the Psalms. Others, not necessarily. Anyway, what I consider the work of your heavens, verse 3, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? Is that reference to Jesus? Says, you know, who's
I got a note that says he's referring to human beings,
okay,
two different ways there,
people, yeah,
not Jesus.
Yeah, in the original Psalm, there's some criticism that in the original Psalm here, that it was talking about mankind.
Yeah, no,
Son of Man being human simply means human.
I don't think the psalmist had a clear view of Jesus coming.
right,
Maybe a little inkling,
right.
that there was somebody coming, but they didn't have the picture yet.
That's
It's coming.
They had a promise, and we'll read later in this chapter. Moses, when we start talking, maybe next chapter, when we start talking about Moses, he prophesied there's going to come another one, a prophet like me. David was promised in numerous places, and he wrote in numerous places about his kingdom lasting forever, and that there would be a king on his throne. So anyway, but here this writer says, kind of puts man's place a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor. and put everything under his feet. Dominion over the world, over animals. Some people today put animals basically on the level of people, but that's not the way the Lord thought of it. In putting everything under him, God left nothing that is not subject to him. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to him, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels when he took upon human form, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. And that is a good summary of how Jesus paid the price for us. What is death? He suffered death. We know that Jesus died on the cross. What happened there?
Separation is in some people say separation from God.
Separation. Death is a separation. When we die, the spirit is separated from the body. In this death of this, a spiritual death, we're separated from God. Jesus died on the cross. His body was separated from his spirit. His body was in the tomb outside of Jerusalem. His spirit freed from the constraint of the body. But then in resurrection, body and spirit reunited.
It sounds like there's another form of suffering that he went through. We see Jesus who's made a little lower than the angels. Before he was pictured as above the angels.
Yeah.
But now he's been lowered down in status temporarily, and then he goes back up.
That's a good point.
So that's another thing he
Yeah.
suffered, a loss of status.
Yeah, the limitations of the human body. We think of them, but if you're God, that limitation is severe.
Why was he lower than the angel?
Part of his suffering on the cross.
Because of the suffering?
He was separated from God. Sin separated him for a very short time. So he kind of lost that connection with God for a short time, and then he regained it back. That's God had to turn his head, in other words, when he was on that cross. He could not look at sin.
That's the way it's described by some. What do you think, Jacob?
He's holy.
What I think is, yeah, he's holy,
He can't see it.
but the reason why he's lower than the angel that moment was, he was born by a woman.
Yeah.
He was born by a woman, and at the same time, he lives with humans. Angels were not born. Angels were not born. After his death and the resurrection, he's now turned into the spirit, not in human form again. That time he
That's
has
right.
been raised above the angels.
Right. So,
I don't, although the critics have said that the song is not messianic, I'm like, the point, let's come back. Because the Son of Man in the song context refers to man, not the Messiah, but I see no problem because Jesus is the perfect human. I mean, as in that he did not sin. Okay, he's a true human, that he did not sin. So I see no problem with stating that here you're dealing with the ultimate man, the perfect, the perfect man, okay, that he did not sin, okay, all right, and so therefore, that's why we can say, yeah, okay, we can see that it refers to the Messiah because he did not sin, he's the ultimate man.
if we were to die, we would deserve it because we've all sinned. And so it's nothing special. We deserve death. But Jesus did not deserve death. And yet he gave his life. And that's why it's a meaningful sacrifice. because he didn't deserve it, so he gave his life for someone, for all. Okay. In bringing many sons to glory, in bringing many sons to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their salvation perfect through suffering. That's an expansive thing. It tells us what was the purpose of everything. Well, why are we? Why is the world? Through whom and for whom. It's created for God, not by accident. It's created for God's satisfaction. That's why he made it. And it should make the author of their salvation perfect through suffering. Or sometimes that word perfect is translated complete. So the author of the salvation is Jesus, made perfect or complete through suffering. How is that?
He did not sin.
He did not sin.
Well, there's another verse that says Jesus had to learn through suffering, right, to be perfect. So suffering was an element there that had to be a part of his perfection.
Yeah,
So, you know, it was kind of strange to think of that, but we all learn through suffering too. I mean,
yeah.
right? None of us have not learned something through suffering of some kind of thing. Maybe it was when we were a kid, we got caught with our hand in the cookie jar, you know, so we got a whack or something, you know, some discipline, but we learned something. You don't go in a cookie jar unless your mother tells you it's okay, you know.
I've wondered a little bit about, is that something that God and Jesus, that they didn't know and had to learn? Or is it something that happened for our benefit, that Jesus demonstrated his humanity, that we might more fully appreciate the gift of God?
Number two, I
Do
would say.
you see the little distinction?
You wouldn't think he would need to know anything. He knew everything.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
You're right.
If
Number
God created us and everything about life, he's one who would understand what it would be if you had a nerve, you know, you hit that nerve, or if the heart is broken for some reason. Did God require Jesus' experience as a person to really appreciate that? Or was that done for our benefit?
Well,
Probably our
I think
benefit.
what, you know, some people might say, well, God really can't appreciate what we go
Yeah.
through as stuff because
He
he's
never-
God, he's
Yeah.
never experienced anything like that, so how can he know the effect that it has on us? So
Yeah.
maybe because Jesus experienced all those things and yet was perfect.
Yeah.
We can't say that anymore.
That's right. That's right. And we were talking about that one Wednesday night, and Jesus experienced something. Does that mean before Jesus came into the world that God's appreciation of human suffering was limited? I don't, that kind of ties God to space and time when he's above it. Anyway, we're getting into some really.
Well, I believe the author is really trying to, give us the idea that he was really fully human. okay?
Yeah,
He
yeah.
suffered, he had to go through things that, yeah, he learned obedience, but not necessarily that, he was corrected, but, learn, learn obedience, continue to be obedient through suffering.
Both the one who makes men holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. We're all flesh and blood. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. It's a great thought. We're adopted children of God. And Jesus is elder brother. I will declare your name to my brothers. In the presence of the congregation, I will sing your praises. So every time these thoughts come across, this writer is reminded of something. And here it's Psalm 22, which is cited for some different things. Psalm 22. Yeah. My God, why have you forsaken me? But in verse 22, which we don't always get past that first verse, I will declare your name to my brothers in the congregation. I will praise you. Yeah. I will sing your praises. That's what Jesus did. In a sense, that's what we should do. Again, I will put my trust in him. And again, he says, here am I and the children God has given me. So there's some different passages, but I think he's getting back to Isaiah.
Yeah, I see Emmanuel,
Okay,
children of Isaiah,
okay. Chapter 12 of Isaiah. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. But then Isaiah chapter 8. And when you 8:17. That's great, yeah. I will put my trust in him. The children that you have given me. I remember when I had, growing up, I had a Bible story book called Egermeyer's Bible Story Book. Maybe some of you heard of that thing. But in the back, there was a section about Bible statistics and trivia. And it said, what is the longest, the Bible is reputed for its long names. What's the longest name in the Bible?
Sarah Hashbaz, isn't it?
Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz, who was
20 letters.
the 18 letters, 6 syllables. Because that was the one that was fascinating to me as a young guy. I've never forgot that. And I never expected to see that name anywhere except in the Bible. But now we have. Are you up on Modern Affairs? There is a singer named Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz Ali. Did you know that?
No,
And
he's probably showing off or something.
no, that's his real name. But if you look
at it from the Bible, they must have came.
It must have come from the Bible. Who would make that up?
Bible background. Maybe his
But it's
parents.
true. It's true, and I've seen it. Anyway, it's also used in crossword puzzles and say Maher-Shalal. Anyway,
That's a mouthful.
but it's not a very pleasant concept. The name of Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz comes from Isaiah chapter 8. And that, in general, that's what he's talking about here in Hebrews chapter 2. The children that thou hast given me. And Isaiah had a couple of kids. Maher-shalal-hash-baz was the second child. The first one was a guy named Shear-Jashub. Probably had some daughters in there too, but anyway. And he also, then he had Maher-shalal-hash-baz. Maher-shalal-hash-baz. Shear-Jashub, a remnant shall return. It is, Isaiah is one who's able to look forward to the coming exile of God's people, but then a remnant would return, and that happened hundreds of years later. Anyway, then he has the second one, and that we read down Isaiah chapter 7, verse 13. Isaiah said, "Hear now, you house of David." That's that it. Anyway, what I'm looking for. Oh, okay, yeah, a little further. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Is it not enough to try my patience? Will you try the patience of God? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son. Well, that seems familiar. And we'll call him Emmanuel, God with us. Some see that as another name for Maher-shalal-hash-baz, but it's looking forward. And that's perhaps why the writer of Hebrews looks upon that passage. The name Maher-shalal-hash-baz means speed to the prey. Go quickly to the prey, not the most pleasant of names,
No hunting, son.
but anyway,
Thank you for that. On stage, you used a shorter word.
yeah, that's right.
What they nicknamed it.
Yeah,
It wasn't had a nickname.
Anyway, look in the news of, modern news of young modern singers from Maher-shalal-Ali. Anyway, the point is that the Lord we put our trust in him, and the Lord has used children to get his message across, not just to Isaiah, but in other instances. God has used children. He uses children in our time to help us. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. That's an interesting passage. How does Jesus destroy the power of death, if you will?
Overcome sin. Sin leads to death,
Okay,
eventually.
the power of death is a separation. The power of death to separate us from God is broken. And that's perhaps the most important way in which it is. Destroy him who holds the power of death. The accuser, the prosecuting attorney, Satan, is destroyed, as we read in Revelation, cast into the lake of fire. And free those who have all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. Are we in slavery by our fear of death?
As long as we belong to God, we don't have to fear death.
That's right. That's
I think
right.
most of the world does.
That's right.
That's what he's talking
That's
about. Most of the people are fear of death. They may not admit it,
Right,
they are.
right. How does that work? Most people would say, well, I don't even think about death.
Yeah, but
But
they
most,
push it off to the back of their mind.
yeah, it's there. It's coming. And some people we were talking one time about the weapons that Satan uses. And the point was made, the most powerful weapon that Satan has is the fear of death. And I thought, well, wait a minute, is that really true? This passage kind of points to that. Because the fear of death, what does it do? If we're afraid of death, we try to put it off, we try not to think about it, we try to cram as much as we can into this life and focus only on this life because we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of death. We don't admit it, like you say, but it's there constantly.
I think materialism,
Yes, I think that's good.
the idea
Good
of
way to put something.
the person who gets the most toys wins. You ever seen that slogan on a
Yeah.
car? Used to have bumper stickers like that.
Yeah.
That's what it's getting at. The most possessions, you
Yeah.
win. And that's totally opposite.
Linda, go ahead.
God wants.
I was just gonna say, I think what's probably most frightening about death, a person doesn't know how it's gonna come,
Okay,
How- die,
yeah,
whether it be pain, being burned alive, or, I think that's the fearful part.
yeah.
How are you gonna be here?
I'll mentioned her name before I mention it again. Evelyn Wooten, who's in the nursing home right now. I've talked to her many times and she said, I'm not afraid of death, but I'm afraid of the process of dying because it can be painful and, uncomfortable. And anyway, we need to keep a hold of her and encourage her. But that's right. But Jesus can overcome that. And I think of Paul, and I think, should we as Christians be more anxious to go to the next world? Paul was, he said, if anything, I'd rather get out of here and go to my home. But most of us, there's a lot of things, no matter how old we are, that we'd like to see and do before we leave this
Yeah,
life.
well, he was split down the middle. But he said, I like to go,
Yeah,
but
but-
again, I want to stay. So he was right
Yeah,
in the middle.
But perhaps more of us, I'd like to stay for me, not just for helping somebody else, not just for working for the church or helping my children or this or that. And I just wonder about that sometimes. Should we have a different attitude? Anyway, it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. Well, that limits it to the Jews, right? Abraham's descendants. And they're struggling in the Gaza Strip. But is that what he means? Who are Abraham's descendants as we think of the scriptures?
Galatians calls Jesus
Yeah,
the seed of Abraham. And Paul says, if you are in Christ, then you are Abraham's seed.
yeah, very explicitly there in Galatians 3:29. That's what I was trying to find the citation. And it also in Romans. But we do,
I mean, I think most people would say Abraham's descendants are the Jewish folks,
yeah. But it says here,
So some
You
Jews
have it.
still have their genealogy going all the way back to Abraham. That they they
that's
take it
difficult.
very seriously. I mean, at least they claim it,
Yeah.
I don't know how they can do all that.
That's right. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise.
So we're spiritual descendants.
That's right.
So that's how we should see
And
ourselves.
that's the more important,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
The spiritual descendants. Not that you can trace your lineage literally, which cannot be done, by the way.
No?
Some people purport to, but when Jerusalem was destroyed,
Yeah.
they
All the records
kept those records for,
Well, somehow they get around.
those
it.
records were gone. Alternative records were kept in other places like Alexandria, and those were destroyed. And I think that was the purpose. God allowed that to happen so that people wouldn't place their emphasis on worldly descent. And say, well, I'm of the priestly, or I'm of the descendants of Judah.
Some rabbi's got a scam that goes around and tells people that their priests come to the synagogue to pray, and then, calls them up after the holidays and ask for money,
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, for this reason, he had to be made like his brothers in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. So what's the point there? He's getting into the law of Moses now. The high priest offered the sacrifice for the people, and then they had the scapegoat that went in the wilderness. But what, first of all, what? They'll make the, first, what did that high priest have to do with it, as we'll find? Had to make sacrifice for his own sins, because he was an imperfect man. And so before he could enter into that Holy of Holies, once a year, he had to make sacrifice for his own sins. So he was an imperfect mediator, an imperfect high priest. But there is a perfect high priest who could make sacrifice for sins without first having to sacrifice for his own sins. God's gonna listen to him. So this is an introduction to the next category. Jesus is greater than Moses, which starts in chapter 3. But the high priesthood, because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Do you ever, we're all tempted in different ways, aren't we? Some people, temptation, yeah, bring it on, I'm gonna respond. But if we're more sensitive, temptation is in and of itself suffering. Do you ever think about that in your life? I'm tempted because I want to do this, but I know I shouldn't. Or maybe if we're even more sensitive, I'm tempted because I know there's some things I should do, but I just don't want to do it. And it's a way of suffering, isn't it? We suffer because of whichever way we go.
Hold you back.
Oh, yeah.
When you're thinking about or dealing with this temptation, you're kind of in neutral, you're
Yeah.
not moving forward the way God wants you to, you're kind of
Yeah.
and stuck in the mud, but yeah, hopefully get out of it, wallow through it, and then you move forward.
He himself suffered when he was tempted. Jesus, it tells us that Jesus, he wanted, there was an aspect of him. The flesh wanted to do those things that he was tempted, turn the stones into bread, jump off the temple, fall down and worship Satan. Those are the three we read about early on. We'll talk more about that, but thank you for your input. And
Everybody read chapter 3, and we'll look at the.
Dan is on, next week, I and my family will be in Jacksonville, Florida, visiting.
You can always do it on the.
We'll probably be on online. But Dan will be taking.
We'll broadcast from here,
That's right.
you can pick us up.
The high priest represented the people of God, okay?
Okay.
12, in the Levitical high priest represented the 12 tribes. And because Jesus is our high priest,
Right,
you know, he
representative.
represents,
Yeah.
he represents the descent, the descendants of the 12 tribes as well as the 12 apostles, those who together the Jews and Gentiles, unity of God.
Yeah,
It's a lot to sort through, but it's important we get these concepts down, you know?
that's right.
So, so many disputes that are, you know, arisen among Christians, they don't understand these concepts of Jesus at the his place, you know? They get it mixed up.
Well, yeah, high priest is difficult for our culture because you just can't get on your smartphones, or go into yellow pages.
Yeah, we don't like the idea of a high priest, as long as you're Catholic.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, Linda and Pam, have a
Take
good.
care.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good week and a good holiday and a safe journey.
Yeah. Traveling grace to you guys.
Okay.
Anybody
All
else?
right, good Thanksgiving, everybody.
Don't eat too much turkey.
Dan.
Diverse group here, it's a diverse group here. Yeah.
You doing okay? Hanging in there? Heart sticking okay?
Matt, I don't know,
You feel better, right?
Matt will turn it off.
We don't actually, I know.